Hello, everybody. This is Zerda with Zerda MTG, and I'm back at it again today with another historic deck tech. And today I'm going to be running you through my Temur Elementals list. I know, it's not standard of 2019 anymore. Elementals aren't that good, but I think you'll be surprised by the showing they can put off with a well-placed collected company and a Embercleave on some creatures that get surprisingly big, surprisingly fast. So to start things off, we have our ramp package, 4 Leafkin Druid, and what I think the new set really brought to the table in allowing us to play this deck, another Elemental Mana Dork. Another Elemental, obviously, being important over another creature type, as it lets us play Unclaimed Territories, counts toward the Omnath damage count, counts towards the Risen Reef count, and counts towards the Creeping Trailblazer count. So I think all that combined, it makes it far more powerful than most other things. Obviously, a 1-mana Mana Dork's still pretty good, but we're not exactly set up to take advantage of it. And this is just really good, especially considering it can also be a land to allow us to skimp on playing more lands and only play 24 with 8 Mana Dorks. Next up, we have 4 Brushfire Elemental. This card might not seem very good at first look, until you realize with a Risen Reef out, this card gets absolutely absurdly large very, very quickly. Even just getting 1 or 2 additional land drops in a turn off of it, the Reef triggers, can make this thing grow well out of what your opponent can contain, slap an Embercleave on it, and you have yourself a win. Same thing for Creeping Trailblazer. It is a Lord, but its primary power comes from that pump ability, where it becomes a sort of reverse Lord. And instead of making your other dudes bigger, gets bigger based on how many other creatures you have. Which is, once again, something you could suit up with the Embercleave. I tested out the Zendikar's Royal Pseudo combo in the Embercleave slot, where you have Risen Reef plus Zendikar's Royal, and you can end up flipping cards off the top of your deck until you've basically just won. And I do think that's absurdly powerful and right for some decks. I don't think it's right for a dedicated Elementals deck, at least not one like this. Maybe with the Lotus Cobra combo, where you then at the end of it drop an Omnath and have an absolutely absurd amount of power. But I think that would take 4 dedicated Zendikar's Royal slots. You only have 2 of each piece. It's a little inconsistent. It means you don't get to really play Collected Company. And I think that's just one of the best cards in Historic right now. You just have to find an adequate shell for it. Moving on. We have 4 Risen Reef. Obviously, this is by far the best elemental payoff and the main reason to be in Elementals. Having all of your creatures basically be a growth spiral is fairly absurd, especially if you collected company into this and another creature, or God forbid, the absurdity of hitting double Risen Reef off of a collected company and getting 4 triggers out of it. Just all of your creatures being a growth spiral, especially when you have something like a Brushfire Elemental and something that wants you to have a lot of cards and a decent amount of mana, or even another pseudo landfall trigger here with Omnath, is just something that's absolutely absurd, and it lets us keep pace even with control decks, because they can Wrath us, but if we just drew 4 or 5 cards, well, each one of those creatures kind of already replaced itself. The Wrath is losing card advantage, and that's something very powerful you can do. Living Twister. Now this is the slot I'm most torn on. I just wasn't very happy with other cards I was playing in this slot. Before, the best card I found for it was Bone Crusher Giant, because it wears an Embercleave very well. Having 4 power, doing 10 damage with a cleave is pretty nice. It's a good form of removal, which is something we needed, but I think Living Twister is going to be able to do that same thing, as well as providing us a little bit more powerful of a late game and a little bit more synergy, as well as a better early game against aggro. I would rather have a 2/5 in play and block my opponent's creature and then be able to shock things after it's out, than stomp on turn 2 and then have a 4/3 later, which, don't get me wrong, that's still very good. Bone Crusher Giant is very, very good against Mono Red and Gruul. But I do feel the Living Twister having the synergies with our Risen Reef, our Trailblazers, and our Omnaths, as well as being able to kill multiple creatures, is just something that this deck in particular wants a little bit more. And the mana cost for us isn't that prohibitive. So we're on 3 Living Twisters. And now for the worst card in the deck, but we don't really have anything better. I tried Akoum Hellhound. It's pretty good, but I found this to be better. Even though Akoum Hellhound can kind of combo with Risen Reef the same way Rushfire does, without the evasion, it's not quite worth it. And it pulls us towards a more weird aggressive route where we really just kind of want to have value. And Overgrowth Elemental does put a 1/1 counter on something, and it does kind of well against the grindier decks. If you have a more valuable elemental out, say you have a Brushfire or a Creeping Trailblazer, they have to kill that. Suddenly this is a bigger threat. But honestly, this is just something to put into play with Collected Company and to help with your elemental synergies. It's not that bad, but it is definitely the worst card in the deck. And as soon as we get another elemental from whatever the next set is, hopefully we'll get one, I should say. But as soon as we have something to replace it, this is the first card to come out of the deck. It has some power, it does have some play to it, but honestly, it's a little under the curve, but we are playing Tribal, and you end up playing some underpowered cards to get those synergies. Now, I would like to play more removal, but that would mean making my Collected Companies worse, and I already have 6, 11, is that? Non-hits? Point is, I want to keep my hits at about 24-ish and above. And the further above that I can get, the better I feel about it, because hitting only one creature with a Coco, not as good as putting 2 into play. And honestly, if you can put an Overgrowth and a Tangled Florodorn, or however you pronounce that, I'm going to get it wrong every time, I guarantee. But the more often you have that as your worst case, as opposed to just 1 or 2 mana dorks. Moving on, we have 4 Collected Company, what I believe is one of the most powerful cards in Historic. I don't think it's currently going to be part of the best deck in Historic. I don't think we have the cards for that yet. But as the card pool grows, just watch this card. It is going to go from, well, who's really playing Collected Company, to, yeah, Collected Company's pretty good, to, oh my god, we need to ban this. I hope it doesn't get banned. This is honestly a pretty fair card. Very fun to build decks around it. But given the recent power creep, I would not be surprised if Collected Company wasn't legal come 2 years from now. But, hey, maybe we also get better answers. Historic's been pretty good about that, giving us Thoughtseize and the like, so maybe it won't need, and I really hope it just becomes one of the cards from a few of the top decks, as this card is absurdly powerful and absurdly fun to play. And now for the second huge payoff of the deck, we have Omnath, Locus of the Royal. No, this isn't the 4-color Omnath everyone's going absolutely absurd over right now. That is, by the way, absolutely absurd. But it is still very, very powerful. So basically comes into play and is a removal spell immediately. It will deal damage equal to the number of elementals you control. Be this on turn 3 after you play a mana dork and just kill, say, an aggressive 2-drop out of mono red, and then they have to use a burn spell on it, and it immediately dies. That's still pretty good. You still prevented the damage from that creature and took a card out of their hand and just 2 for one of them. But then if it lives and you start playing lands and landfall triggers start to put 1/1 counters on your creatures, suddenly your Risen Reef is getting massive and out of bolting range, out of shocking range. Your other creatures are just growing, especially your Brushfire elementals, which are pretty hard to block for some decks. And you can just absolutely take control of a game. It's a huge tempo payoff, a huge ramping payoff, land payoff. And if you have a Risen Reef out, when you start playing lands with this, your land drops suddenly become absolutely absurd. Or not a Risen Reef, what was I trying to say? If you play elementals with a Risen Reef out in this, suddenly you're drawing cards, putting lands into play. putting counters on your creatures because you put lands into play, potentially drawing cards once you get enough lands out, because once you control 8 or more lands, which, once again, we're a Risen Reef deck, it's going to happen, this card just becomes even more powerful, and it just kind of really draws us into playing the deck. And the last card is Embercleave, because of how well some of our creatures wear it, such as the Trailblazer, the Brushfire Elemental, or anything that we've pointed Omnath at enough times, or even just occasionally an Overgrowth Elemental that our opponent wasn't able to answer because they had to answer some of our other creatures, looking at these two, and that caused this thing to just kind of grow out of control. Suddenly it has 5-6 power. That only takes 2 or 3 creatures dying. You slap an Embercleave on it, and your opponent's just dead. I am giving some consideration, though, to replacing this with potentially the new Omnath. I wouldn't want to play too many because of what it would do to our mana base, but with Unclaimed Territory, which, by the way, very good card for a tribal deck, and another reason that I have the Twister over the Bone Crusher, even if, it's still not the most synergistic with the abilities being activated, but hey. And Bone Crusher isn't too hard on the mana, but sometimes double red is a little tough early. And turn 5's not early. Point being, this can actually cast our Living Twister as opposed to our Bone Crusher Giant, at least for the colors. And but what I was trying to say is it means that we do have 4 of a land that can already just cast the new Omnath, adding, say, 2 or 3 more cards into our mana base to cast it wouldn't be too difficult. So I would consider it, but I don't think it's worth dropping Embercleave, because the reason Embercleave is so good in this deck is, like, over the Royal, which I didn't actually get to, is its ability to close out a game. We have basically infinite value. We have the Risen Reefs, we have the Omnaths, we have the Living Twister, and the Collected Company. We don't really need more value cards. What we need is a way to just push through our massive creatures and kill our opponent. Because what I've found is the greatest weakness of this deck is to things like an Ugin deck, where they can just exile our entire board. It's as if we didn't do anything, and it's very hard for us to regain purchase after a Ugin specifically. But with Embercleave, we can kind of just kill them before that becomes a problem. We have a Brushfire into a Risen Reef draw, and suddenly an Embercleave that goes onto said Brushfire or Trailblazer or whatever we have is just pretty good, even if it's on a much smaller creature. Anyway, that's the deck. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you all next time.